Weapons of the Spirit by Father John J. Hugo. This book was written by a diocesan priest in the Pittsburgh Diocese in 1943. It was a world at war which received this book, and it is a world that is still at war, albeit in different places and for different purposes, that will yet again witness this book. Without further ado, I shall break into the foreword of Weapons of the Spirit by Father John J. Hugo. Since the outbreak of the war, a contributor to the Atlantic Monthly, considering the relation of Christianity to the war, summarized his views as follows. And we need not be surprised to find that, while the word Christianity may be freely invoked, there will be little evidence of the reality and little disposition to study the reality while the struggle lasts. The writer of these words is a distinguished Catholic scholar, and the attitude they describe, one fears, is only too well founded on fact. In time of war, Christianity is set aside. For the moment, we begin to inquire seriously what Christianity demands of a nation at war. To quote the same author, we begin to receive awkward answers. At the very outset, there may be a scruple as to whether Christianity and modern war are in any way compatible. A Catholic editor describes the modern war mentality in this way. Aquinas, Vittoria, Suarez, Grotius, Leibniz, for all the influence they exert on the modern concept of the just war, might as well be Babylonian soothsayers or Buddhist bonzes. Take, for example, St. Thomas, who taught that no war was legitimate unless it was conducted with justice and love. How quaint, how pathetically archaic, and how characteristic of those old scholastics who wrote so much about angels, justice, and love in conjunction with war. Imagine! The same writer quotes the words of an American newspaper man just after Pearl Harbor. Before long, the American people will be in a mood to approve any brutality that may be used on the enemy's civilians and civilian hostages, because the savagery of the Germans and the Japanese will make the country war-mad. Unfortunately, the willingness to forget Christian principles is shared by Catholics too. The great Catholic magazine writes editorially, upon the occasion of American troops landing in Africa, an incident that apparently required explanation in view of our indignation at Germany's occupying neutral countries. There is the war, and nothing that stands in the way of our winning it can be spared. We will march through French colonies, through France itself, and anything in the path of our determination must join with us in our advance or be thrust aside. That sounds not like Catholic morality, but like the immoral principle, the end justifies the means. Perhaps worse was the recommendation of a well-known Catholic leader who told us that there should be a moratorium on criticism. That is, it appears to follow, we are not to embarrass the government or the military by using Christian standards to evaluate their acts. That would obstruct the war effort. My country, right or wrong. Is that Catholic teaching? The following pages are intended to be a protest against this cynicism, whether deliberate or unconscious, this dismissal of the gospel teaching for the duration. They are a protest against the view that would postpone the work of Christianity until after the war. Modern war is the negation of the gospel law. Accordingly, there is no time when an affirmation of that law is needed so urgently as during war. One remembers, uncomfortably, the stinging rebuke delivered several years ago by the magazine Fortune to the Christian churches for their willingness to compromise with the modern nationalistic war spirit and their failure to teach an absolute religion in time of war. Rebuke from such a critic is rebuke indeed. The law of Christ is the law of love, and there is nothing in the Gospels or in the pronouncements of the Church to indicate that it is to be suspended during war. Is it simply, then, that we are too fearful or too nationalistic to assert our loyalty to Christ? It is well to remember the threat. For whosoever is ashamed of me and my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, of him will the Son of Man also be ashamed when he comes with the holy angels in the glory of his Father. Let the reader not be alarmed. I, too, have studied elementary ethics, and am therefore aware that, when certain conditions are fulfilled, a war can be just. I am also aware that this teaching has the authority of St. Augustine and St. Thomas, nor do I intend to deny or dispute the opinion. But while I believe that war may be just, at any rate in theory, I am also convinced that it is not Christ's way. A war may be ethically just, as judged by reason according to natural standards, but Christ has given us a supernatural way, where we are guided, not by reason, but by faith, and where we are to move, not under mere ethical motives, but under the impulse of love. You reply, perhaps, that these two ways are not contradictory. That is true. All that I say is that Christ's way is the higher, but because it is Christ's, and we also are Christ's, we should certainly abandon the way of the merely natural man and follow him who said, I am the way. Observe, moreover, that it is modern war which I say is a negation of Christianity. The adjective is important, for it is only when all the required conditions are fulfilled at once that a war can be just. Modern war, with its dependence on conscription, which deprives men of their right to a vocation, with its disregard of marriage and its injury of the home, through forcing men to live a celibate life, its abetting of onanism, a crime against nature, by means of contraception, its lie propaganda, and, worse yet, its hate propaganda, its aerial bombardments of cities and of non-combatants, repeatedly condemned by the Holy See, its murder of the helpless and the innocent, its slaughter of men with complete indifference to their guilt, its disregard and degradation of personality, subjecting this, as all other spiritual things, to the material interests of the state, and finally, with its purely economic cause. This is what I say is the negation of Christianity. Would anyone care to deny it? Yet even discussion of such things is apparently suspended for the duration. As a priest, speaking of the conditions necessary for a just war, especially the one requiring it to be conducted in a spirit of justice and love, I have been asked repeatedly, if we followed such ideas as those, how could we ever win this war? It is necessary only to assert Christian principles to see their incompatibility with modern war. Naturally, therefore, those who are enthused over war cannot be zealous in asserting these principles. Lest what I am to say should be misunderstood, let me clarify certain matters at the outset. I believe in the right of self-defense. I believe also that, under certain circumstances, self-defense may become a duty. especially where the failure to defend itself would bring grave injury to others. I also believe that Nazism is a great evil, that Christians may not condone evil, that we must combat this evil to the end, cost what it may. Let me add, however, that I consider communism a great evil, and one that should be strenuously opposed. I am surprised at the silence of so many concerning this false and injurious system, especially of those who a few years ago were loud in their condemnation of it. Is it reading motives into the actions of others to suspect that this strange silence is not unconnected with the fact that the communist government is now our ally? Expedience, like necessity, makes strange bedfellows. Certainly, however, the opposition of such men to Nazism is not morally impressive. Liberalism is another iniquitous system, which, like communism and Nazism, must likewise be opposed by Christians. Equally condemned by the Holy See, it is the dominant school of thought in England, France, and the United States. It is just as great a moral evil as the others. It is also an evil nearer home. Not official in the sense that paganism is official in Germany and Russia. It is nevertheless the dominant point of view in religion, morality, politics, and economics in the countries which we call democratic. And from its womb came that neo-paganism, which in turn spawned communism and Nazism. Footnote. According to Pope Leo XIII, the oppression of Christianity by tyrant states is worse than the moral oppression by liberal states, only because Christianity cannot even survive physically in the former. But the moral evil of the latter is just as great. If there really exists anywhere, or if we in imagination conceive a state waging wanton and tyrannical war against Christianity, and if we compare it with the modern form of government just described, liberalism, this latter may seem the more endurable of the two. Yet undoubtedly, the principles upon which such a government is grounded are, as we have said, of a nature which no one can approve. Immortale Dei. End of footnote. Because it is nearer home, and because it is the cause of other grave evils of the day, we ought first to carry on war against its errors and abuses. Indeed, if we had been frank in acknowledging the defects in the liberal system and courageous in removing them, instead of screaming against its monstrous progeny, we would not now need to fear the latter, which, meanwhile nursed on the plentiful corruption of their parent, have reached a dangerous maturity of strength and destructiveness. Even yet, to remove the abuse brought on by liberalism would undermine communism and Nazism by taking away the unwholesome diet upon which they batten. But it is not pleasant to be reminded of one's own country's national sins, and therefore, instead of fighting liberalism, we have left it go unopposed, anxious rather to show how much we have in common with it. I believe, then, that justice and righteousness demand a war to the death against all of these errors, starting, I say, from the one closest to us. You will see, then, from this that the chief point at issue in the discussion which follows is that of means. Scientists, in fighting against disease, do not take the expedient of killing off its victims, although this would be one way of ending its ravages. On the contrary, their aim is precisely to preserve the lives of the sufferers while destroying the disease itself. Religious men, in fighting moral and spiritual disease, should take no lower aim: to save the souls of the afflicted for Jesus Christ, who died for them, is assuredly a commendable ideal, and one also that is possible of realization if we employ the means that Christ has put into our hands. On the other hand, it is not possible to destroy moral evil simply by killing off those who have been infected by it or who live unwillingly under its tyranny. Although I am firmly convinced that Nazism must be destroyed, I am equally certain that this will not be accomplished by killing Nazis, any more than I could hope to rid the world of liberalism by murdering liberals, starting with those in my own neighborhood. The impossibility of taking this shortcut to bring an end to social evils is even greater where the evil is moral and spiritual. Against spiritual disorder, material means are of no avail. You cannot shoot an angel. I can remember an old professor saying. He meant, of course, that spiritual effects can be produced only by spiritual means. As an animal brain cannot produce thought, since the means proposed and the desired result are of two different orders, so also a material means, like an army, cannot destroy evil of the spiritual order, and much less can it bring into existence such positive spiritual realities as justice, love, and peace. Because, therefore, the evils in the world are great and terrible, because, also, they are of the spiritual order, it is absolutely necessary that men take up against them the weapons of the Spirit. Until this is done, evil will remain and increase. John J. Hugo.